Hello and welcome to episode 13 of React Native Radio. Today on our panel we have Peter Pikarczyk.
Hey everyone.
Lee Johnson.
How's it going?
Kevin Old.
Hello.
And I am Nader Dabbit. Our topic today is going to be a day in the life of a React Native developer. So what we're going to talk about is going to be kind of like the day-to-day workflow and how you set up your computer and what type of text editor, et cetera, kind of just day-to-day things you might run into when you're getting going working with React Native. So, Peter, do you want to kind of start us off? How do you kind of have your workflow set up as far as like your environment and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I end up using is Vim, Tmux, iTerm to house everything, Xcode, obviously, and the iOS simulator. And for starters, I use this awesome app called Slate. And what it does is it lets you configure things through JavaScript, which is super nice. Let's say it's a window tiling manager. Let's say I connect another monitor to Slate. It'll automatically throw my terminal and my Xcode on one monitor and then keep iOS simulator on the other, for example. I usually do all of my development on one screen, though. So what I'll do is I'll throw Slate to have Xcode in the background. iOS simulator will take the bottom right-hand side of my screen, and then terminal will take up the left-hand side of my screen. And I'll usually split that into separate panes, one where I'll have the task runner, and then one where I'll just do all my coding in Vim.
So how many monitors do you have?
I just use one monitor most of the time. If I'm at work or if I do want to connect up to a station, I just use a cinema display at home. But usually I don't even use that anymore. I just code right off my laptop. I've just found it to be much easier to move around because I do a lot of moving around. I'm constantly going somewhere. So it was just hard going from 2 to 1 all the time.
Yeah, I definitely understand how that is. Like I've gone from anywhere between 1 and 3, and I feel like sometimes with 1 I get more accomplished for some reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just because when I'm at work and I have 2 monitors, like I find myself moving my head back and forth to see what's on both screens. And then like I'm on the train coming home working on stuff, and now I'm back to 1. Like how do I organize all those windows without freaking out? So after that, like I just got used to using 1 wherever I'm at, and it's made life a lot easier.
Have you done any Android development yet, or are you still working mainly in iOS?
No Android development yet. I actually just got my first Android phone. I've been given the challenge to build an app someone built in Android, so I plan to win that challenge. But no Android stuff yet. Nice.
Yeah, neither have I. I need to. I've played around with it. We haven't built anything in production yet, and I haven't really built anything substantial yet either. But I'd like to get into that. Everything we've done so far is iOS.
Yeah, same here. What's especially nice about Android is you get much more bang for your buck with the APIs. Like you get access to everything versus iOS just kind of keeps you limited. Xcode will freak out on you if you try using something you shouldn't do, even though it may be exposed and accessible. Your app will probably get taken down from the App Store versus Android, as far as I know, lets you do whatever you want. It's like using a jailbroken iPhone all the time.
Well, the approval process is automated, so there's not an actual person looking at it.
Yeah, that's kind of nice.
for the Google Play Store, when your app is accepted within about 15 minutes, nobody looked at it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Vim, which my setup's going to be wildly different than that, but we have some hardcore Vim guys, and so I'm sure we have a lot of listeners that are hardcore Vim guys. So do you want to speak more on your Vim setup, because they vary from simple to ridiculously crazy? Like our coworkers has code folding and Git commits all inside of Vim. Like everything is inside of Vim. He never has to leave there. So can you expound on yours a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I was just on Twitter today, and I just kind of like threw this out there. I figured for 2016, like what are people doing with Vim and Tmux, and what are some cool plugins out there? And I think Kent Dodds actually brought this up, that syntax highlighting is still kind of a pain with React and JavaScript and Vim. But I think I've got a pretty good set of tools. It's not just one tool. So let me just read off some of these plugins for you guys so you can understand what I had to do to get this working. So Vim JavaScript, Vim JSX, yet another JavaScript Vim package, JavaScript library syntax, HTML5, Vim.js indent are solely the ones that I use to get JavaScript where I want it in Vim. And that includes syntax highlighting and spacing. I don't have like auto completion yet, but I've kind of avoided it for now. I've been okay without it. But yeah, there's about 6 plugins that I have to use to get syntax highlighting to be where I want it to be.
I do have you beat on the number of Vim plugins. So I'll launch into my setup a little bit. I've actually used Vim for, I believe this will probably be going on 16 years, 15, 16 years.
Holy cow.
Yeah, it's just been the editor that I've just developed a muscle memory for, and I know how to use it. I have kind of honed in on a set of plugins, and what's crazy about that is I've used it for so long, and I'll learn a new way of doing something either by watching someone, or I'll watch a screencast or something like super basic, and I'll realize that thing that I don't know about that I've just learned has existed for like 20 years in Vim, and I just didn't know about it. So I'll try to learn that. But I use Vim and Terminal, and so far with any of the React Native or Exponent projects I've worked with, I've not had a single issue with the compatibility and working with the code I need to work with. One of the things that I was initially when Facebook announced React Native, I was like, oh man, I have to use Xcode, and I don't want to give up my editor. But so far I've not had any issue, and I just kind of leave Xcode in the background and just kind of hit the play button and put the simulator in one quadrant. And I did for a while develop off of my laptop only, usually a 15-inch is what I've always had. So I've just kind of embraced that constraint. But the past 2 years, I've had an off-brand 27-inch monitor, and I finally in the past year have learned how to set it up the way I think it should be. And so I literally define quadrants, and I use a different window manager. This one's called Moom, M-O-O-M, and it's really powerful in that it lets you save the configurations of your windows. So if you have your browser in one place and your chat in another place, you can hit save, and then it remembers those applications in that place. And you can even tie it to where it automatically switches those and puts them at their right widths and heights when it detects a certain monitor. So I have it set up to where when I plug my laptop in to my large display, it will automatically reorient the windows. It looks like something out of science fiction, that just like all the windows start moving around and getting into their place. But it's able to detect that large display. And then I don't have anything for when I disconnect it to a smaller monitor, but I could, or just have it on the MacBook itself. Like I don't have that set up, but what I've done is kind of divided my screen into quadrants. So I have the first quadrant, and those are equal parts. And I then overlap. So I have most things that are like chat, or they're a console, or the React Native utility when you run the npm start, for instance. I have that in like a smaller quadrant, or actually fit into a quadrant. And then my main editor terminal, so I use iTerm 2, and I have that kind of overlap the quadrant. So I kind of I established a rule of quadrants, and I kind of break it when it's something that big. And the same for my browser as well. If I'm doing web development or the Chrome debugger in React Native, I make that a larger piece of the screen so that I have enough, I have visibility into everything so that I can quickly iterate. And I was really surprised when I was working with Exponent recently, and that it didn't have the Control R refresh that React Native has, but hopefully that'll make its way into it, because it's extremely valuable. And once you get in that kind of workflow, you have everything in view, and then you can just kind of look from one area to the other and iterate really, really quickly. So, but I did have the same issue with the syntax highlighting, and over time using different plugins, and all of my stuff is on GitHub in my profile, so I can link to that. And I use different plugins to help with that syntax. And I'm the same way, Lee, as your friend. I have I don't live in Vim, but I have learned to make it long-lived, or a long-lived session. So I'll launch it, and then I'll open multiple files, and I'll see my GitHub or my Git status in there, so I know which lines have changed and which lines were deleted or added. So I have that kind of feedback, but I don't subscribe to the whole operating system is Vim. So
yeah, I think it even has a task manager and email client in there.
Yeah, there's that, and IRC. There's some amazing stuff in there, and there's also amazing stuff in Emacs as well. I mean, that's the same. Those two ecosystems have just built up to where it's literally an operating system. But I don't use those. I simply like to keep a long-lived history. I do use I don't use tabs, but I use buffers. I've learned to use buffers in Vim over the past year, and so I'm able to toggle between. It's somewhat like tabs, but you literally just cycle through the buffers. So it's kind of like an array. You just cycle to the next file, and if you open multiple files, then you just continue, and you want to get from file 1 to file 3, you cycle through file 2 until you get to file 3. So anyway, but yeah, it's been a great workflow. So with especially with React Native and Exponent. I mean, it just the tooling just fit what I was able. It was my existing workflow. I was able to use the tools I had, and yeah, they just fit right in.
So I know when it comes to Vim, colors and syntax highlighting is always a little off, right? Like it never gets to where you want it to be. Is there a specific theme that you use, to get to where you're at? My favorite so far has been Grovebox. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of it, but it's had the best JavaScript support for me so far.
I've not heard of that one. I use one of the dark themes, so I like that dark. I'm interested to know what percentage of us are using a dark background with related to code versus a white background. I recently switched about a year ago from this harsh, what looks to me now like is a harsh white background, to having a dark background with different text or lighter text.
For me, I like to have an extremely, extremely dark background with as bright text as I can find. And right now I'm using Sublime, and I don't know the name of the theme that I'm using, but it's a combination of lime green, baby blue, and peach.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, the stuff I use is similar to that default theme that comes with it. I forgot the name of the editor that you just said, but that can
Sublime.
be edited out.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sublime.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah,
that comes with Sublime. So
yeah, I switch back and forth actually. Sometimes I'm in a dark mood, sometimes light mood. Now I can't do the extreme like Natter, because to me it just gets blurry, and the really, really bright on the really, really dark just starts to run together for me. But I'm older than you guys, so my eyes aren't as good.
I don't do the extreme, but I do certainly like the darker background. It seems my eyes. I just noticed that they were less tired at the end of the day, and I could. And it's not that I needed to code for long hours, but I don't know. Have you guys noticed that? Is that the reason that you use a darker background, Natter, or?
Yeah, I've just gotten used to using a dark background, and I just find it easier to kind of look at the code and understand what's going on a little faster. It's just easier for me to kind of read, pretty much. Is why I do it, why I like it.
Yeah. So what about you, Lee? What's your setup?
Yeah, I feel like I need to make a disclaimer on that before I get started.
Okay.
Because I don't use Vim. I can't.
That's okay. Yeah, I was hoping this wasn't turning into a Vim episode. But
No, I hate it. I can't stand it. When I started coding in the late 90s, my friends were using it, and I hated it then, and I hate it now. But, I mean, I know great programmers, the best programmers I've ever met, all use it, so I'm not knocking it.
Well, I hated it at first. I literally did. I hated it absolutely at first, and then I picked it up and thought, oh, wow, this is amazing, and I think in this, so it just naturally fit. So.
I guess that, that first crazy Vulkan key combo you have to do to like save and exit without a bunch of prompts or something. After that, somebody showed, you just hit this, and this, like 5 keys at once. I looked down and said, you're an idiot. I'm never doing this. So, and then every time I go try to use it, same thing happens. I have to go click, and I'm like, you're crazy. But so, and I also had to Google Tmux when Peter mentioned it because I have no freaking clue what that was.
Do you want me to dive into that a little bit? Tmux is freaking awesome.
You can, because I may not be the only person out there that I've never heard of it. Now, after I Googled it and saw it, I recognized that our backend team uses that, or a version of that. I didn't know what the heck it was called.
I think Linnell uses that.
Yeah, I didn't know what it was.
So Tmux is the next version of Screen. If you've heard of Screen before, the ideas are the same. It's just kind of these like virtual sessions. And so like the first like big part about Tmux is that you can split up the windows any way you want them to, right? You can have like 3 terminals across, up and down, whatever you'd like to do. But some may argue iTerm can do the same thing. But what happens when you close iTerm? You lose all of that. With Tmux, when you create sessions, you can close iTerm, you can do whatever you want to do, and reopen it, and you can just hook back into that session, and you haven't lost your workspace whatsoever. There are even plugins. There's a Tmux plugin manager, and there's a plugin that even lets you persist Tmux sessions across restarts too. So you literally never lose your workspace when working on something. It's super easy to resize stuff. It's super easy to connect to numerous sessions and just like work on other projects. That's kind of how I use it. I split it up between projects and then just like lay things out a certain way. And just when I'm finished working on something, I just like disconnect from that session and reconnect when I'm ready.
Yeah, so it keeps it kind of like the window manager thing Kevin was talking about, but specifically related to the terminals.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's cool. I guess to continue. Well, first I'll continue with my disclaimer. So, I come from a background of enterprise job applications, especially from a government standpoint. And so Eclipse was what you used back then. And, we didn't have a lot of say in the development environment. It really was dictated to us by our customers. We were consultants. So, when we were doing Java, Eclipse was just the standard, and that's what you use. So you got used to the IDE world. And then we actually moved from Java to .NET. And, of course, use Visual Studio for .NET, which is another IDE, massively better than Eclipse. So that's kind of where the background I come from. So I like IDEs, and I've tried them all. I've tried JetBrains. I've tried Atom. I call it Atom and Visual Studio Code IDEs. They're really slimmed down versions of it. JetBrains is more of a full-fledged IDE. But right now I'm using Visual Studio Code for all the React Native stuff and just about any React stuff that I do, actually. And really, really enjoy it. They've got a version in the works, the Taco Tools. I know we had mentioned it in a previous cast, but it will have full IntelliSense for React Native, which if you've never used IntelliSense before, in Visual Studio, there is no better autocomplete. I mean, it is the de facto standard for autocomplete, and they're going to build full IntelliSense with React Native, all the React Native objects into the React Native plus VS Code, which is pretty cool. And they're also doing tasks. Like you can run React Native bundle, React Native whatever from there, and you can debug and set breakpoints inside of Visual Studio Code, and you don't have to go to the console and Chrome or anything like that. It's pretty cool things on the horizon for IDE lovers. I like IDEs because everything's organized at one place. The syntax highlighting is always on point. I never have to fight with that. And the autocomplete is usually better. But as far as my physical setup, I have 2 monitors, a large 4K 28-inch monitor, and then my laptop screen. And I use the new El Capitan split. You know, if you hold the little green maximize button down, then it'll kind of let you do a half and half. I don't know if you guys have experienced that yet, but I use that, and I do my actual coding window on one half, and then Chrome or whatever simulator or whatever I'm using to view what I'm doing on the other half. And then on my smaller monitor, I have communication stuff like Slack and email. I do a lot of Xcode stuff too, and I usually swap out just do the desktops on the larger monitor. You know, I'm not usually in Xcode and VS Code at the same time for long periods. I'm usually either or.
So do you do all of your React Native coding just in Xcode, or is that when you would if you're coding something with React Native, you would use the VS Studio?
Yeah, I use Visual Studio code, and the Xcode would be running, and you can have your little simulator. Just have the simulator running on the side and do it that way.
Yeah, awesome.
And same with React Web, which kind of works exactly the same, so you don't have to change your setup going from one to the other. It's just simulator versus a Chrome window.
Awesome.
I'm actually really excited about Microsoft's fork of Node. I've been hearing some really cool things about it, and I wonder how that would change React Native and React and all those things that depend on Node.
Can you go into a little bit about that? I haven't really heard much about that.
So I don't know much more than what I've been seeing on Twitter lately, and that's with Microsoft writing a super ES6 supported version of Node. So even though we're constantly getting updates to Node, we're still really far behind on Chrome's version of it, right? Both SpiderMonkey from Mozilla and Chakra from Microsoft have way more ES6 features than we're currently used to. So that's all supposed to change. How it all works and any other details I'm not too sure about. It could just be hype, right? But from what I've heard so far, it's pretty exciting.
That's awesome. We have a few people from Microsoft that are going to be joining us either in the next couple of weeks. I'm not sure which day, and maybe we can shoot that question to them when they're on.
Yeah, it'd be really cool to see and hear, and how that would affect our ecosystems right now. Would we have to do anything crazy to switch to using SpiderMonkey or switch to using Chakra? Is it going to be easy to do? Those would be some really cool questions to ask.
This might be a little off topic, but it does have something to do with tooling, I guess, a little bit, and workflows. So have you guys ever used a service like Appetize.io, or how do you kind of let your team kind of test and look at the apps that you guys are building? When I say team, non-developers.
So that's where I think Exponent is really cool, because I just have them download that app, send them the link to the app, especially if it's a super easy React Native app, and they can just Slack me their feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's something I'm showing someone, I'll use Exponent. But so far, I've only really worked on React Native, and everyone had that needed to had access to the code base, and so they could run it locally and then show it to the additional management or project managers that wanted to look at it. So I've not really done much of the sharing, but I mean, I'll default to Exponent just for its simplicity. Now, of course, that's without an app that doesn't require native bridged components. So
and I think for me it's the opposite. I actually enterprise sign the IPA and post it with a HTML install link, and then just send that install link to whoever I want. I used to use TestFlight. I used it a lot before it became part of Apple, but it's almost just as easy now to just throw it on the new IPA on S3 and send our team the link and say, hey, go install this. We have done some remote bundle. So in your app delegate, point the bundle file to an external URL. And then when you can update anything not native, anything pure JavaScript, just by updating that bundle. And then we wrote it into the app to where it checks, it loads from that bundle. So they just get the updated version. They don't even really realize they're getting the updated version. It's a real dirty, I guess, version of like a code push kind of thing. But for distribution, I still enterprise sign it with enterprise certificate in iOS. Now, we have to do that anyway. I did that because that's what I'm used to, but we have to. We're using external third-party native components for communication and messaging and things like that. So Exponent wouldn't work. There's a lot of custom things in there.
Now, to share your app with Exponent, you have to be currently already using Exponent, correct?
Right, and you have to be signed in, and then publish. You get a publish button that'll give you a URL, and it's a exp://. And then what's neat is that you can have that link like sent to an email address or phone number right from within Exponent, or you could just send it any other way. And if you're on iOS and you open that link, so say it was texted to your email, you could just click on that link, and the Exponent app that's installed, as soon as you click on that link, it will open that app in the Exponent application. So whenever you're dealing with someone, showing them, it's not like they have to go and cut and paste that inside of Exponent. It seems to respond directly to that.
So this is sort of off the beaten track here, but have any of you guys tried Nuclide with React Native?
I haven't.
So Nuclide is this, it's like Facebook's text editor that they built on top of Atom. And you're supposed to do some really cool stuff with it. Like, you don't have to open up Xcode. You don't have to do anything crazy. Everything just works. You've got the task runner built in. But for some reason, I haven't been able to set it up that way. I still feel like I have to open up Xcode and stuff. So I was curious to see if you guys or if anyone else out there has more to say on that.
No, I haven't looked into it yet. I have heard of it. So how would that go about as far as the iOS simulator goes if you're not using Xcode?
So you could still use the iOS simulator because you can open the iOS simulator without Xcode. But that's about it, really. Like so there's a way to use the iOS simulator without using Xcode, and then you just pair that up with Nuclide.
Yeah, and then Cordova does, it's like Cordova has been doing. You can simulate a Cordova app, and it will just start the simulator, but not Xcode. Or Android, it will start an Android simulator, but not open the full Android IDE.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I did. It seems like when I first tried Nuclide, I had trouble getting it to work too. But then I saw that it was built off Atom, and downloaded Atom, and it was great. And I used it for a while. It actually started crashing on me for large files, JSON data files and stuff, a lot. So I just started kind of playing around with other things, and we were playing with Visual Studio Code early on, and at the time it was only TypeScript and Node applications, and then they announced full JS6 support. I tried it again, and just kind of been using that ever since.
Yeah, that's so cool. I still haven't had a chance to screw around with Visual Studio Code, but I definitely should give it a shot. I've been sort of like leaning towards giving NeoVim a shot, which is like this complete rewrite of Vim. Everything's much faster and smoother. But I need to give Microsoft Visual Code or Visual Studio Code a shot, because I've been avoiding it for some reason, and I know it's going to bite me in the butt when I find out it's like the best editor ever.
And save some questions, because I think the guys we have coming on are actually working on that Visual Studio Code plus React Native build.
Oh, gotcha.
So as far as keeping up with all of the newest versions and stuff like that, how do you guys go about, I guess, number one, keeping up with what's going on in the community? Like, what's your way of getting that information? And number two, when a new version of React Native comes out, how do you guys all go about updating it in your code base on whatever application you're currently working on?
So that used to burn me in the butt every time a new version came out, because I felt like all hell would break loose. Maybe I just like didn't know what I was doing at the time, but I would literally create a new branch. I would update everything, test once, test twice, test 5 more times to make sure that it all works before merging it into master. Because I don't know about you guys, but there were times where I would upgrade, but then I may have accidentally made a small change, and then I would check out like a previous set of commits, and it still wouldn't work, and like there would be like the node modules like mix up, and it would just like drive me crazy every time.
No, you're definitely not the only one. That was a regular occurrence. I would say was, because we haven't really had that happen, or maybe we just haven't upgraded in a while. That's probably why we haven't had it happen.
Yeah. I think that's what everyone just like realized they need to stop doing. Like, okay, we were at the point where everything is awesome and stable. Let's just stick to where we're at, and we'll upgrade in a few minor versions.
Yeah, that's definitely what we do. We evaluate. And as far as your first question was, how do you keep up with stuff? The reactnative.com site's great because it kind of shows a lot. It pulls in a lot of posts and tutorials and things from other sites, but they've also gotten really good about putting the release candidates in there, and in a like kind of pinkish reddish background, so you can really see, there's a new version out there. So it's a great place to stop and just check through what have I missed, because they kind of aggregate stuff there. It's not it's not just one site. They're aggregating from a bunch of sites. But for the update, yeah, we'll evaluate what has been fixed and added in this release to see if it's something that we even need or is important. And regardless of whether it is or isn't important, I usually like to try to create a branch, like you said, and try the upgrade, rename or increment the version in your package JSON and run the npm install and give it a shot and see how it goes. But if we have a lot of errors and it seems like it's going to be a problem to get it to work correctly, and the feature list doesn't hit anything that we need right now, then we don't worry about it. Because honestly, since we've been using it, there hasn't been, since the animation component was updated, there just hasn't really been anything that we ran into and it was like, oh man, we can't use this because it doesn't do X. Most of the stuff that's in a release for us these days are nice to haves, not necessary or gotta haves for us.
Yeah, I tend to, on the React Native side, just kind of stay on a release, and I'll give it a try. I've run into some errors where there's some Xcode issue that I literally have no idea. I try to follow whatever it's indicating is the problem, and that turns out not to be it. And so I've rarely upgraded a React Native project, and I'll add that I don't have one of those in production. So it's okay that it's not updated. And like Lee said, I really don't have anything that I need from the new features or bug fixes. So whatever I'm doing with my custom components seems to just work with that version. As far as Exponent, I noticed that well, it does come packaged with their own version or their own fork of React Native. They seem to do pretty frequent releases, and they in the package JSON, each release is marked with a date. So that seems to not be an issue. And I've switched a time or two to a different version. So I think, and of course those are, okay.
I'm sorry to throw your train of thought off. That's just like something that's been boggling me for the longest time.
Right. Yeah. So I'll collect my thoughts, and then I'll, let me pull up the page. So if you go to Exponent.js, React Native. Okay. Yeah. So, okay. I'll paste this in and I'll talk about it once I collect my thoughts. But yeah, good. Thanks for chiming in so I can clarify. So what I like about Exponent is that it has releases, and they tag those releases by the date that they do it, and that's some date tagged in their fork of React Native, and then to update to one of those in the package JSON that's in your Exponent file project, it's like updating the Git branch. You simply update the React Native and you do # and then the date. So there was a release on January 2nd of this year. So 2016-01-02 is the branch name, and then run npm install, and it seems to take care of that. So I've not run into anything. Now, of course, again, these Exponent apps aren't using Bridge native modules, so there may be something that's just due to the nature of a React Native app, and if it's using something that's bridged to the OS or what have you. But for the most part, I try to stay away from upgrade and approach with caution. So,
yeah, for me, for our company, we have upgraded a few times. We started off on a very, very, very early version. I forgot what version it was, but we've had no choice but to upgrade just to be able to use some of the newer features. I believe we're on 0.17 now. Is that right, Lee?
I was thinking maybe 15. I have to check it and see. Okay. I don't think we're at 17. 17's pretty new.
We're around there. But as far as keeping up with what's going on, I try to stay around the GitHub repository, also reactnative.com. I'm in the Discourse channel, even though I'm not one of the most active people. I just keep an eye out for what's going on there, kind of see the chatter there. It's kind of a real-time discussion of like some of the more up-to-date stuff going on there. So I would recommend that. Those three things, I guess, for people that are trying to keep up with what's going on in the React Native community. What about as far as debugging, any issues that you've come along when you're developing with React Native? What is your go-to place to kind of answer those questions other than just kind of Googling the question?
Without a doubt, for me, inside a React Native app, I use the console. So I'm, web developer by nature. So the web console is my go-to, and I find myself logging things out to the console and using the Chrome console that React Native provides, or that link between them. So I always enable that and go out to there. That may not be the preferred way of doing it, but it's just something that as soon as I saw it, I thought, wow, this is going to make this entire experience so much better. So,
yeah, that brings a good point, I think, to share with people, and Nat and I have experienced it. We noticed when we were developing an app, everything was going great, and all of a sudden the responsiveness was terrible. I mean, it just became slow as Christmas, moving between. I mean, and we didn't change anything really that we knew of. We added some stuff. We didn't upgrade. We didn't do anything crazy. And it took us a while to figure out it was the logging, actually. If you log a large amount of data to console.log, then it actually takes up the thread for the UI, and it will make your app crawl in just a painful way. And it took us a while to realize that. We were dumping out some data. You know, our app uses a lot of data, and we were dumping out some data trying to figure out what was wrong with it, and didn't think much of it. You know, you're developers, and sometimes you're lazy developers, and the answer is always, just log it. Yeah, we'll turn it. We'll comment that log out later. But we did notice that excessive logging will kill the performance of React Native app. It was kind of a surprise.
Oh, wow. That's awesome to know. I try to keep those minimal, but I've been in some situations with, the React Native app I have most experience on uses the Flux portion from the web implementation, and in that dispatcher I had logging of all the actions and the data there, so I could see how that could that's a lot of data probably, so I'll keep that in mind next time I'm in there.
Yeah, we were banging our head thinking, what did we do? We didn't do anything. Why is it? It's terrible. And it was like, well, maybe it's just the simulator, or maybe it's just our environment. So we even tried to run on devices, same thing. I mean, you would hit a button and it was like a terrible delay before it would go to the next view, and it's just like everything just broke. And we finally figured it out. We had added, same like you, we had added a data logging, and this just happened to be a really large root object in a JSON data set, and it basically paused while it spit all that out and then continued the UI.
Man. Also on the topic of debugging, so one thing that React Native gives you that it's kind of in your face that I use, but I'll acknowledge, is that in the simulator, when you do something wrong, you get that kind of red screen of death that prints out what happened, what was the thing that it doesn't like. And I love that in React Native. I've been using Exponent for some things, and I don't have that. I've actually been a little frustrated that so my Exponent app will just crash. And that may be something that happens in the iOS development world, where if you do something that it doesn't like, it just crashes. But in Exponent, it literally just crashes, and it would be something like I was playing with some Flexbox styling, and I provided the wrong or a invalid parameter to one of the justification styles. So like how you would justify a button or some text, and it crashed, and I just was like, wow, I had no idea that I didn't have that red screen of death to tell me exactly what went on. So hopefully that will improve. But I mean, I think that debugging right there, and how React Native just tells you exactly what's wrong from a component perspective, I think mostly. But I think that's a huge win as far as debugging.
Yeah, as a developer moving from React Native into React myself, I've almost found it easier to debug React Native as opposed to actually debugging React with Babel and Webpack and all of these tools that I'm using. I feel like I'm getting better feedback from React Native. I'm not sure if I'm doing something wrong or not in React, but that's just been my experience so far.
No, that's completely fair. I've actually, so I had the Webpack set up and Babel and all of that. And then this summer, once Redux came out, and I switched over to that, the red screen of death that's apparent in React Native, that has its own kind of Babel plugin. And so I have that set up for my web stuff, but I actually have found that the React Native stuff is more accurate than even that setup. So even if you know you have it set up right, I think sometimes whatever they're doing in React Native seems to be the right way. So hopefully the projects will learn from each other.
Have you guys ever tried any of the other console tools like console.dir or just like styling your console.logs or using console.trace for debugging?
Yeah, I use the console.dir will give you, like, if you've got an object, it'll go ahead and expand the object, let you navigate through it like in a tree view. And there's one, I believe Chrome has it, that lets you start a timer and end a timer. I use those every now and then to kind of do a poor man's benchmark on some code. That's not really the best thing, but sometimes it can just give you a snapshot of what went on.
That's pretty cool. I've never used the time one, but
yeah, it's on. There's a Chrome developer tool, Chrome DevTools console page. Like if you just Google that, Chrome DevTools console, and it'll tell you everything you can do with the console object in Chrome, and it's got several different use cases in there for those things.
Oh, cool. I'll definitely have to check that out. Something that I've been playing around with, and I don't know if it's like too crazy or not, is styling certain actions, whether it's like a Flux action or a network request or a UI action. I'll style the console.log a certain way, especially if I'm debugging, and then I can kind of like turn on and off like the actions that I want to like help me figure out what's actually happening.
You know, I've seen people do that. Can you go into how you do that?
Yeah, sure. So there are libraries that help you style console.logs. I probably should have used one, but I didn't realize they have any until after the fact. But basically what you can do is you can set like a foreground color, a background color, and even font sizes and stuff, and control console.logs that way. So I'll use like a light green color for network requests, like a light red color, for errors that aren't necessarily like thrown errors, but errors that I believe could be errors, right? Does that make sense? And then I'll use yellow for UI, and then like a light blue color for anything Flux related.
That's really cool. I'm going to have to check that out.
And then are you saying you can filter it out based on color?
So like basically what I'll do is in my code, I basically leave the console.logs. I have a separate file that handles console.logs, and then basically like an on or off switch for whatever, right? So like turn off all network requests, and then anywhere there might be a console.log for a network request, it'll stop those requests from showing up. It'll just like return false instead of returning console.log.
That's cool.
I'm looking into something now after you mentioned that, and someone's using like CSS in their console.log kind of. Is that kind of one of the ideas around it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's literally what it is, and I never realized that it's CSS that you could do. I was just doing background and color, yeah, but you're right. It's just CSS that runs in the console. That's cool.
That's really, really cool.
Yeah, so I actually use a logger for Redux, and it's called Redux Logger, and it actually uses that exact same CSS technique to log the actions that it's working with, and it uses different colors for the previous state of your state, the action and the data that went through there. So it'll log that object out, and then the next state, and it uses gray and blue and green, so that you're able to glance at the information and see what your previous state was, but it does it in a very nice way, and it's all using styles, and they're kind of like inline styles, it feels like. So yeah, it's a really neat technique that seems to work across browsers. So.
Okay, well, speaking of Redux, this is a question that's probably beyond the scope of this episode, and it's something we're going to go into on a full episode in the future. But what are some of you guys' workflows as far as data and managing data as far as your Flux architecture is concerned?
I'll just go ahead and say I use Redux exclusively. So that's literally the way I think now. So I think in reducers and a single state. Redux is amazingly simple, and I actually ran across an awesome boilerplate for Redux in Exponent or just in React Native. So I'll put the link in the show notes, but it's under the Exponent.js user on GitHub, and it's just called Hello World Redux. And it shows you in a single file how to have a Redux state and manage that through in your React Native app. And you can begin to see like how simple it is, how easy it is. And anything that I actually don't think I work on any projects that don't have Redux. Anything I would have would be just the vanilla Flux, but I think I've converted everything over to Redux.
How difficult was it setting up Redux with React Native? I know I've heard some people have some problems with it. That's why I asked.
So right now it's on the version 3 of Redux will work with React Native, and I know that support for 4 is coming soon. So I saw that on the Twitters, and I'm certain that once that is resolved, version 4 of Redux had a couple of breaking changes, and I know that'll be out and about on the Twitters and reactnative.com certainly. And I think there's a huge advantage once that's there. Anything we can do to get Redux into an ecosystem, but I've not run into an issue with Redux and React Native on the 3.0 releases. So I think if you're able to kind of stay on that, then you'll be okay.
Can you do a quick explanation of what Redux adds to Flux and maybe a touch on reducers too, because in case somebody has never heard of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Redux is a kind of an iteration on the idea of Flux, and it's really about a single state. So a single source of truth, which is a single state. And a lot of the times the pain points that I and others have had with Flux is that, and other Flux variants, is that you have your components that are querying stores in some way or another. And that can be essentially multiple states. So you can have something going on in your store, but then if your components are able to pull that data or pull whatever data they want from the stores, you can have essentially a false sense of what your state is. What Redux does, it literally just has a single state that you carry forward. And that state is 100% read-only. So it is passed through a reducer. And a reducer is just like in a map reduce operation where you loop over something and then you perform a reduction, whatever that is. And the idea is with reducers are that they're pure functions, and you always return the state, you never mutate. So if you're adding a to-do to a list, you return the state and that addition, but you don't actually modify it. So you're always returning. So it has a very functional feel to it. And then, like that's really the guts of it. It's primarily about the reducer and the state flowing through a reducer. You can break it up into multiple reducers and then, but they're ultimately combined into one. So if you think of the best way to think of a reducer is that if you have a function You have a switch statement inside that function, and if you can have a set of if statements, if else clauses, either or, and whenever your action matches one of those cases or one of the if else blocks, then it will jump into that bundle of code that does a modification to the state, or not, that returns a new state after something is added or taken away. So does that help?
Yeah, and I think one of the big things that I noticed was, like you say, the state. It has its own get state method, right? And you can call that, and it's always there.
You can call it, but I've worked with Redux since August, and I've not queried the store directly to get the state. So what's neat is there's a React Redux package that allows you to connect. There's literally a connect function that allows you to connect your Redux state to your React components. And I hook that at the very top level in my application. So my app component, or my home, or whatever's the top level, that's where the state gets passed to. So after it leaves there, so to kind of bring this full circle, so after you got your state, and after it goes through a reducer, it then will go into my React application, and it's just passed down the component tree to wherever needs it. So I'm literally never retrieving or doing that traditional retrieval in the Flux world, where you're waiting for the component did mount, you're setting up listeners and all of that to query your store. It's not necessary. So the data, once the state has changed, that connect method simply sends the new state down the component tree.
So the state is basically an object, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And basically the app is connected to that state at all times, and when the state changes, it automatically knows that it doesn't even have to know. It just it's already connected to the state. So when the state changes, the props change if they're connected to that state, and all the subcomponents just get all that data. Okay, that makes a lot more sense now.
Right, yeah. So the very basic example is in that connect method. When you're connecting it, you just pass state directly into it. So yes, literally on every change to that object, that state object, it will re-render your app. Now, a technique that's used is having a selector function that can reach into that state and only get out of it what you wish to pass down to that React application. So you can kind of fine tune your app. It's kind of the fine tuning piece. But at the very basic, you're just literally passing that state all the way down the tree. So, what are you guys using? Is anyone still on Flux or one of the variations?
Yeah. So we kind of agreed to stick to one single Flux implementation for the entire year, because we were going through that phase of trying out everything between Reflux and Alt. And this was before Redux too. So we decided on Alt, and basically everything at work and outside of work for me has still been Alt, which is great. I really don't mind it. I've had some experience with Redux, but I still need to dive in to really learn more about it. But Alt has been okay for me.
Are you using Alt inside of your React Native apps?
Yeah, I use Alt everywhere. Normal React apps, React Native, everywhere, and it's been working fine.
Are you finding that you're able to reuse bits of code, or maybe your actions, or something of that nature, between the web and a React Native app?
Yeah, all that works just fine. Basically, the only thing that I can't reuse, and I'm sure you guys are into this too, is the actual UI view layer. Everything else is just in a shared library.
And how are you sharing that between, say, your web instance and your React Native? Do you actually have that portion packaged up as a separate NPM package, and you just require it in either your web UI project and your React Native project? Or
So basically, it's just a private Git repo that I pull in using npm. So yeah, exactly. It's just an npm package that I version. Depending on the version that we use, it'll have like different features or updates or whatever. It's basically what we're moving towards doing for everything at Trunk Club. It used to just be a shared library of components that we used across everything, but now what it's turning into is like the mothership of the entire client-side ecosystem. So basically, super thin client-side apps. Versions aren't controlled within the client-side application itself. It's all controlled in this shared component library. So if you want to use a certain endpoint that we have for alt, you kind of have to upgrade your component library. And in that case, we're kind of all on the same page. The reason why we do this is because we have 30 of these client-side applications, and it's kind of hard juggling all of them at once. So building this like fat shared library has proven to be super helpful and easy to use for everyone at work.
Have you run into any issues across the client-side apps that are taking advantage of this when upgrading, or can you talk a little bit about versioning as well and how you do that?
Yeah, so like the toughest part about all of this is people, right? Because you can have, right, like at the end of the day, computers will do what you tell them to do, but humans won't always, right? So like we'll have like 5 or 6 people that simultaneously might be working on, a new component for this shared library or whatever. Basically, a rule of thumb is for every PR, you just bump the patch version up a bit. Minor versions are breaking ones, so you basically can't go backwards. You can only move forward. And some people may not like that because it means you might have to do some extra work to some of your other apps to upgrade them. But for us, it kind of keeps us in line and keeps us in check too, and like keeps everyone moving forward, right? So with the React Router 2.0 coming out, what we're going to do is we're going to cut a 1.4 release of our shared library. And if you want to use React 2.0 or React Router 2.0, you'll have to upgrade to 1.4 in the shared library.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely been a learning experience for me because I've never done something like this before, but now after 6 months or so of doing this, it's proven to be an awesome experience. Building new apps has been a breeze, and then reusing components throughout apps, regardless of the platform, has been awesome too.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we are going to get to a new part of our show that we haven't done before. We've taken some questions from people on Reddit and on Twitter. We're going to go over those in just a moment. But before we do that, is there anything else you guys want to go over as far as workflow is concerned?
I'm good.
Okay, cool. Well, I guess I'll go to the first question that we have. The first question is, I would like to know more about persistent storage options in React Native, like async storage wrappers and tips on how to implement them. And this is from user Cool Beans on Reddit. So, as far as async storage is concerned, the way that I've done it so far is if I'm working with a large data set, like a big object or array or something like that, just stringify it, save it with a token, and then when you retrieve it, just parse it. But I'm sure there's some other ways of going about doing that. Have you guys used any async storage with React Native?
Yeah, that's actually all I've used, and I literally use it exactly the way you do as a key value store. The only exception I have is I use immutable JS in everything, and so that's there's not really any different. I just have to 2JS my immutable structure and stringify it. to go in there. But so far that seems to have solved all of my needs. And I've actually run across a React Native async storage package that I'm looking at, just called React Native Store, and it seems to kind of wrap async storage to make that a little bit cleaner. And the other thing to add is I've just found a simple function. I can't remember where I got it, but just it was very simple abstraction on the async storage, so that you could just supply it with a key and a value, and it would handle the semantics of that interaction, getting it in and out of async storage. Not that what you have to do with the async storage object itself is complicated, but just a minor abstraction.
Okay, cool. Well, our next question is from Jason Morang from Twitter. And the first part, it's a two-part question. The first part is, are there any libraries similar to Bootstrap for React Native? The second part is, if I were to create a library for React Native similar to Bootstrap, how would I go about doing that?
I don't know. This one might be more philosophical, but I almost feel like Exponent does a really good job of that. They're not Bootstrap in the sense of just like UI components, but they are in terms of building awesome components, whether it's native or JavaScript only, that get the job done, right?
Right.
That's kind of that one's kind of in the gray area, but I feel like they've been doing a really good job of giving me components that 100% work the way I want them to.
Right. Yeah. I've not run across anything that would be a Bootstrap for React Native, but I have run across a lot of just well thought out components that do one thing extremely well, and like I ran across one a week or two ago that implemented the top nav bar to look like a iOS 9 application. That kind of I don't know. I think the value with a lot of this is that we're able to implement components and then kind of glue those together versus having a one-stop shop. Yeah, but I could see if you wanted to build that, you would simply just have to go down the list of what's necessary. What are all the elements, and what's a common style among them, and then just set out going one by one and implementing components that fit that design, and then offer themes and so forth. So.
Yeah, and I think I'll add that, in native development, everything has this default style. It's usually a very simple style, like in iOS. A button is blue text. It has a very simple style, but it is the iOS style, and then Android has a little bit different take on it. And their philosophy has always been, tweak it as you need it, but try to keep it simple kind of thing. And I think React Native definitely enforces that. And if you use a lot of the objects in React Native, they're actually using the native version. That's what makes React Native so great. It's actually using the true native version of that. So if you use a text or button or whatever, like a text object with an alt tab, you're going to get a plain text object. But if you use text input, it's going to look like whatever the default native value is, and then you're allowed to style it however you want, which is the way native tends to approach things. But there are libraries out there. There's a React Native material kit that has some material buttons and things built into it. So you would just say, button or card or whatever, and it inherits the style based on that. So I would, if you want to build one, I think that's a good one to check out, because, I personally don't agree with using a material kit theme on an iOS application because it's kind of in the wrong environment. But it would be a good thing to look at to see how are they structuring a button, how are they structuring a text value or an input or something like that.
Yeah, I second that. As far as the only thing I'm aware of is there's two different material that are out there that I'm aware of. One of them is Material Kit, and then there's Material React Native. It's on mrn.js.org, and they're both pretty similar. And I guess if you were to go about building something like you're talking about, you could kind of go and see what they've done and kind of get a starting point. So that would be a good place to start.
I'll just kind of add to that what I was saying. I really feel that the React community and the especially the React Native community has this maybe I don't know, an idea that you don't have to have everything in a given toolkit to be able to produce something. So you're able to literally just piece things together. If you find a set of buttons that you like that are sort of styled the way you want, or provide the component structure you're looking for, then you're able to take that and put styling against it, and with a few minor modifications, that component is now yours. So, and I just really feel like there's not the need as much as it was for Bootstrap when it came along to just be a good default for web applications that gave some structure to an area that there was no structure. Seems like we have a lot of structure by the nature of where React Native lives on the phones. So,
yeah, I agree 100%. And you can pull up a website and in about 10 seconds tell if it was Bootstrap or not.
Exactly right.
And yeah, I don't think as mobile guy, I don't think we ever want that to be the case in the mobile world. You download an app and immediately, oh well, it's using this kit.
All right. Well, that sounds good. I think we're going to go ahead and jump on to our picks. Kevin, would you like to go ahead with your pick?
Yeah. So there's a project called React Native Vector Icons. It is simply awesome. It's I'll put a link in the show notes, but if you want some different icons in your React Native apps, it's bundled what looks like 8 or 10 different icon sets. Font Awesome is in there, and Foundation icons. It doesn't have the Bootstrap stuff in there, but it has the Octacons, the ones from GitHub, and that's just absolutely amazing to me. That you've got like a one-stop shop of what looks like a total of maybe 1,000, 1,500, somewhere in between there, icons that you can take advantage of in your apps. And that's really all my. Actually, I did want to add one thing to how I keep up with the React Native community. React Parts has a native tab that is just a list of React Native packages that are on GitHub that are being updated. It's an invaluable resource, I think, for this community. So definitely check that out.
Lee?
Yeah, I think my pick this week is going to be Siphon. This is getsyphon.com, and it's a tool for building React Native apps without using Xcode, similar to something like Exponent. It's a CLI heavy, and it is in alpha right now. I just think it's important to highlight these kinds of things because it makes it really easy for somebody who's not familiar with React Native to at least try it out. And if you check out that video on getsyphon.com, you can see how easy it is to create an app and push it and see it in your phone. And you can open that simple app and make some changes. And then, with very little time invested, you can kind of see what it's all about, at least get a taste of it. And I think that's really important for introducing people to new technology.
Okay, Peter?
So my big one has been and still is the Exponent.js React Conf contest. Granted, you only have 6 days to complete it, but if you watch this before then, you can still win a free ticket to React Conf.
Those React Conf tickets are pretty hard to come by these days.
Yeah, I actually have a better one too because we only have 6 days left for that contest. But if you haven't heard of JS Tips, it's just one JavaScript tip per day that lives on GitHub by this guy named Lover Joel. It's a pretty cool repo. It's definitely worth checking out. There's stuff that you've probably never thought about doing, and it makes life a little easier.
Cool. I'm checking that out right now. JS Tips. My picks are going to be the first one is appetize.io. They are who powers the React Native Playground, which I use consistently. And I've just now uploaded an app that I built to see how that experience is, and it's been flawless. They let you pretty much upload your app, Android or iOS. You can upload Cordova. You can upload React Native or Native, whatever, and you can kind of look at it on all these different screen sizes and send the link to other people and let them look at it. So that's one way of distributing your build. My second pick is going to be a blog post by Sebastian McKenzie that I just saw today, 2015 in review. I learned a lot by reading that. Sebastian is the person that has built 6to5, which is now Babel, and I didn't realize this, but after reading his post, it looks like he used to work with Jed, one of our co-hosts that's not here today, for a few months, and he's had quite the year, and it was a really entertaining story to read, and it's also informative about a lot of the stuff that people that have these large open source projects, kind of what they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, and it's really interesting. So it's Sebastian McKenzie, 2015 year in review on Medium. All right, well, that wraps up episode 13 of React Native Radio. We will see you all next week.